How to stop seeking. You've probably heard the concept that seeking, or the sense of being a seeker, is what constantly reinforces the sense of there being something to find, there being a missing piece, that something is missing, that something needs repaired, and that activity itself has to stop for realization to occur, for awakening to occur. This concept isn't completely wrong, but it's also not completely right. So how do you stop seeking? If you recognize that sense of being a seeker as uncomfortable, how do you stop it? If it seems like the seeking to accomplish, to become, to overcome, always imagining a future where things will be better, or imagining a time when we will be realized, enlightened, or when we finally have that perfect partner, or when we finally have security or safety, or when we're finally free of the sense of dissatisfaction or free of suffering. If you find that uncomfortable, then you're perfectly normal. That's exactly right. The sense of being a seeker is more of a side effect than an activity. It's the side effect of a repressed emotion, the side effect of the feeling of dissatisfaction, irritability, frustration, anger, loneliness. So when we sense there being a seeker, when we sense there being seeking, we don't need to make it wrong. We don't need to try to make that go away so that we can be enlightened. Instead, just look where it points. If we're seeking safety, maybe we feel unsafe. Maybe we feel uncomfortable. Maybe we're afraid of lack of safety. We're afraid of being injured, debilitated. We're afraid of the inevitable, old age and death. So fear is at the core of that. If we recognize that we're seeking validation, or belonging, or acceptance, then we don't have to get over that. We don't have to stop the seeking or suppress it or tell ourselves that there is no seeker so that we can get to some future event called enlightenment. Instead, just look at what might be underneath that. What is that arising out of? What is the emotion? Is it loneliness, or the fear of loneliness, or both? Is it the fear of not belonging? Is it grief? So this is one very practical way to deal with this phenomenon of seeking. So I don't recommend bypassing these emotion states. If you have the tendency to overlook that, or to tell yourself that with realization I don't feel emotion, that's usually a dead giveaway that you're avoiding something. So it might be worthwhile taking a look. It's like if the shoe fits, wear it. And if it doesn't fit, maybe try it on one more time. Another approach to this mechanism of seeking, or this experience of being a seeker, is to recognize that although there is a sense of seeking, there's not actually seeking going on. Because where would you seek? Where would you look? We only have this experience right now. We only have the feeling of being in the body, the sounds, the visual landscape, and thoughts bobbing around in consciousness. Where is that which we are seeking? A thought might seem to tell a story about something that's going to happen later. But once we recognize that as one single thought, one image in our mind of a different time, a different place, a better situation, we recognize presence. We're right here, or that thought is right here, and this sensation is right here, and the sounds are right here. So there is only right here. There's nowhere to go. There's no end of the rainbow as far as seeking is concerned. A thought only points to itself. And sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, it points to an emotion that's in the present. But when we remind ourselves of what presence is, the only possible experience, we also remind ourselves that seeking isn't something that can actually happen. It's a promise of a future that can never come. It's a reaction to a thought that causes us to form further thoughts and then follow the thought chain down the line, which is really just another form of avoidance. Partially, we're avoiding what we don't want to experience, which is repressed emotional material. But partially, we're avoiding what we do want to experience, which is vivid presence, aliveness, reality, truth, living truth here. I want to make another point about seeking when it comes to practice. You may have heard a teaching that would say something like, well, who's going to inquire? Or who's going to meditate? And some people would assume that that means don't meditate or don't inquire. And that's a total mistake. Hopefully that teaching is coming from someone who's realized and they're actually pointing to inquiry. They're pointing to that first movement of inquiry, which is self-inquiry, which is equivalent to that first shift, that first awakening. But beyond that, it becomes unhelpful to ask that question. So it becomes a moot point, and you don't really need an answer to that question to decide whether or not practice is important. If you feel inclined to inquire, then inquire. If you feel inclined to meditate, then meditate. Who's meditating? The same one that got out of bed. Who's inquiring? The same one that's driving the car. The answer to the question is meaningless if somebody has realized non-doership or no agency. If they haven't, it could be a relevant question for self-inquiry, but that's practice. So all along this process, there are practices and inquiries and meditations that can be very helpful to clarify further stages of realization. Who practices? Practice practices. Who meditates? Meditation meditates itself. Who walks? Walking walks. Who eats? Eating eats. The universe eats. The universe chews. The universe swallows. The universe hears. The universe decides. The universe remembers or forgets. This is the realization of interconnection. When one string is pulled, all strings move. When one center is moved, all centers move. Everything works together and there aren't things. And one experience is every experience. There's no need to divide practice from non-practice, delusion from enlightenment, self from other, coming from going, awake from asleep. These are just movements of mind. Luminous consciousness, always present, never anywhere else, never seeking, and nothing is sought after. Everything brings you to the present. Everything points you back to undeniable truth. And it only takes one breath, one sound, one sensation.